This opening makes me moist. It sets up the grim tone for the first half of this finale episode, intercut with the scenes of child abduction and the mass misery that will ensue. In this situation, children are being abducted by the government to be abducted by aliens. It's a shame that the showrunners felt the need to actually include this wonderful clip of Gwen as a part of the narrative when it didn't really need to be. By the time the military are escorting the children onto buses, Gwen and Reese are helping to protect children from a fate worse than death. It is here that Reese spontaneously materializes a camcorder to record Gwen making the speech. Firstly, the child sitting on her knee is seemingly absent from the recording, and the other children are depicted as silent and seemingly bored in the background. No crying, no fear, just boredom. Even Reese winds up doing a pretty piss poor job of crying for the camera. Look at how white his eyes are. The 456 reveals its intention to use children as drugs. It's an absolute mastery of planning on the scriptwriter's part to have such a vital piece of information kept until the very final episode. The public are told that their children have to be inoculated, another code word the government uses alongside labeling the children units to hide the awful truth of their shameful activities. From the public's perspective, the only thing that's out of place is their children behaving badly in unison. No doubt the majority of them would do anything to cure them, and the government has a solution. It begins at 12 p.m. Jack, Gwen, John, and Bridget are then seen in what looks like a cafe now hosting the bodies from the Thames House massacre. With the 456 having the ability to lock off the building the night before, I was surprised that anybody would be allowed inside. I would have thought the 456 would have wanted to keep itself protected now that humanity is at its boiling point.
The human race in defense of its children will fight to the death, and if I have to lead them into battle, then I will.
And let's not also forget that there was an airborne viral outbreak that killed a lot of bloody people. Even if we assume that this cafe scene isn't set in Thames House, how would the military have gotten the bodies out of the building without risking a viral outbreak in central London? Another piece of disbelief for me was that Mr. Decker was the only survivor of the massacre.
You managed to survive?
Well, I just stood back, sir. A strategy that's worked all my life.
This should have been the point where Decker was revealed to have a deeper connection to the 456 than merely being its translator. Not only would such a reveal satisfy this moment, but with Decker being the 456's confidant, it would truly test Decker's commitment to this alien beast and expose how much humanity is left inside him. Instead, the 456 just spells out that it's a drug addict in black and white to the government and unit. If there was some secret affiliation between Decker and the 456, I think that could justify him being treated as a punching bag far better than what was established about him prior. The warning by the government of a military revolt is fascinating. Don't comply with the orders you're given, your children are forfeit. This global authoritarian angle that the episode leans into here is so interesting. With the power vacuum created by the fall of Torchwood and the disgrace of the British government, the Americans and units step in to take control of the situation. Sadly, I don't think logistically a single morning would be enough time to mobilize 80% of the world's children. 80? Why have I got 80? That's bizarre. Granted, this is less of an issue with the story and more the real-world problems of TV scheduling. Day 5 only has an hour slot to sort out the gigantic threat of the 456. I think perhaps one more episode of Children of Earth would have sorted this pacing issue out quite nicely. We come to what is probably my favourite part of the entire series, the moment nobody who watched this series is likely to forget.
John Frobisher was a good man.
The government needs a scapegoat to make the public fall in line, and John Frobisher is their poster boy for the nation's obedience. He's been used from day one and now is being used as part of the spin that the country needs to bend to the 456's will. The awful thing is that there's no personal grievance between the PM and Frobisher. It's just classic politics at work. The fact a government official is able to just get a gun like this, I admit, It's a little bit far-fetched. It's more that a display from two fantastic actors absolutely smashing it visually and verbally highlights where the magic of this sequence lies. The lines Susan Brown delivers are performed stoically, displaying absolute loyalty to the man she worked with for years. Despite knowing full well what John is about to do, she still remains strong whilst telling Lois how much she didn't know about John Frobisher. Despite this strength, she eventually breaks into emotion.
I think people will forget how very good he was.
All this whilst the visuals show Frobisher silently preparing to create the stuff of nightmares in a child's bedroom are conjured perfectly. His shaking hands, the slow motion reflecting the difficulty of his task. Humanity's decision to concede to the 456 or go out fighting mirrors his own terrible decision. For once, John doesn't give the powers that be what they want, even if it means committing a horrendous act. His wife's haunting face, juxtaposed against the girls having an innocent pillow fight. There is so much going on in this shot. The score has this almost heroic tone to it, with the strings and singular female vocalists soaring. How could a man and wife live on with their children being taken from them? They are preventing two children from having their identities stripped and being used to fuel the addictions of intergalactic drug addicts. Despite knowing what happens on every rewatch for this script, this scene shakes me to the core. Like, I'm reading it right now, I am getting goosebumps. The fact this show goes so above and beyond with the heavy themes, scenes like this are a work of genius.
We're not in a prison drama, are we?
We are in a prison drama. This is the fucking Shawshank Redemption, right? But with more tunneling through shit and no fucking redemption.
The second half of this story splits off into two branches. One involves Gwen and Reese protecting the children on the estate, and the other involves Jack destroying the 456 by sacrificing his own grandson. Let's start with the Gwen stuff, as her first point of order is to inform Ianto's sister of his death. Hats off to the screenwriters for this fantastic scene where Gwen fumbles to empathize with Rhiannon.
And his dad, it's Ianto, isn't he? He was always so proud of his dad.
What did he say about it?
About his job and things.
He worked in Devon. So if Ianto gave you that old shit, then you didn't know him at all.
This could come off as funny, but the fact the shot lingered on Gwen highlights just how little we knew of this character that we were all so unhappy to see go. The escalation of the situation leads to soldiers breaking into homes to kidnap more children. The tension rises with some horrific scenes of child endangerment, and I loved the lines from the adults telling the children not to worry and that it's all a game. Seeing the men on the estates fighting alongside Andy against the military was a frightening yet satisfying sequence too. Andy is actually seen serving the community here, something any police officer worth their salt should take up as their duty above all else. In between all this, we see the children being taken out of their schools onto the buses, much to the upset of many mums and teachers. Shots like this one, with entire classrooms being emptied out, were absolutely prime. Suddenly, it's less about individual students' grades and more about the performances of the schools themselves. The fact that talented and bright pupils that just happen to live in a bad catchment area are going to be the ones shipped off into space. It's a tragedy of ungodly proportions to think about. Sadly, the sight of countless child extras looking as unvexed by the situation as the kids in 1965 took me out of the immersion somewhat. This was further worsened when this shot gives off serious artificiality with them all screaming. We kick off the other branch of the story with some more questionable editing choices. Johnson displays just how brainwashed she is.
If you're going to get rid of 10%, then take the 10% you don't want. All those kids on street corners, we finally got rid of them.
And it was surprising that the character who was originally sent to kill Jack wasn't being redirected to maintain order whilst the nationwide child abduction took place. Instead, she's seen sitting around with Jack's daughter and grandson, and then is immediately able to mobilize her forces to break Jack out of prison. Despite this being the government's second attempt to keep Jack in a box, the fact he could be broken out so easily was a good demonstration of just how weak the political system had become under the strain of meeting the 456's demands.
Wavelengths. The 456 are named after a wavelength, and that's got to be the key to fighting back.
I started getting a bad feeling about this whole setup the moment they mentioned this wavelength business. It all seems like a dream come true that they could just deafen the 456 in the same way they did to Clem, but it comes at a cost. The sacrifice of a single child. And which child just happens to be at the base at that very time?
Hey, soldier!
And what do good soldiers do?
Good soldiers follow orders.
No. They die on the front lines. What made this scenario all the more interesting was that Jack's immortality was never established as being inheritable, but it was still a possibility. I think this was why Jack gave the okay to do this, in the hope that the child would just recover from the deathly injuries like he can. I appreciated that the screenwriters left this to the audience to figure out and not just have it spelt out to us by Jack or Alice or Johnson. Now, in concept, this is brilliant writing. You couldn't have had some other random child used for this outcome, as it wouldn't have had that gut punch of a bitter karmic justice for Jack's actions in 1965. However, the more I think about it, the more unsatisfied I feel.
Just lean forward, you want the blood to flow out your nose, not down your throat like a fucking gurgling drain.
The 456 is never confirmed as operating alone or as part of a greater whole. Now, on the one hand, I am glad that this is the case, because the enemy being shrouded in mystery makes it all the more scary. On the other hand, killing the thing in the box and proclaiming the war is over feels... I'll just let the PM say it.
I suppose you could say we were lucky.
How do they know that the 456 didn't just send an ambassador to the box and that there aren't more aliens monitoring the situation above Earth? I only assume this because 12 children evidently wasn't enough to satisfy the 456 originally. Was this entity wanting to get a lifetime supply of its drug, or was it wanting to expand its enterprise? I guess we will never know. And I am perfectly okay with this.
What did you do?
I don't know what you're all so happy about. How does the children screaming in unison suddenly make everything okay?
It's soon to tell. We don't know exactly what happened yet.
This final scene in the cabinet room with Bridget, using the super Torchwood contact lenses as well.
And Lois was very helpful. She told me how they worked. But everything that happened in this room has been recorded, sir.
What exactly are these recordings being saved to at this point? The laptop with the previous recordings is God knows where, since Rhys doesn't seem to have a hold of it when he gets flown back to Wales. It feels good that the Prime Minister would get his comeuppance after everything, but this moment truly doesn't make much sense. 6 months later, and the remaining members of Torchwood meet up on some hill. The characters are once again overlit as all hell for a nighttime sequence, and Jack describes fleeing from his guilt by traveling around the world. Gwen returns Jack's vortex manipulator so that he can teleport to a ship in outer space. Prior to Gwen giving the thing back to him, the last time Jack used this was in Journey's End.
I told you, no teleport.
So the Doctor disabled it, and yet somehow the explosion of the Torchwood base got it working again. Right. And that, dear viewer, is it. Jack goes to the stars with Gwen and Rhys, hopefully living a more stable lifestyle with their baby on the way. This ending is very conclusive if you're living in 2009.
Are you ever coming back, Jack?
Oh, he'll be back. Like the shit Terminator.
So despite the kinda convenient ending, the story wraps itself up well enough to justify this being the final series of Torchwood. With such a huge pile of tension established throughout the series, the cracks were no doubt going to show with such a rushed resolution. However, John Frobisher's death and Jack facing Judgment Day provides an emotional blow that supersedes most of the shortcomings of this episode. I give Day 5 an 8 out of 10. There is another series of Torchwood after this, which I have not seen, and frankly, I don't want to. Nobody has recommended it to me. And it might be for good reason. Christ, look at the IMDb ratings compared to Children of Earth. Why was another series required after this decisive conclusion? Ianto's dead, Jack's putting himself into exile, Gwen's going to be a mum. What would be the point in another series? Huh! Good luck to anybody that has to critically analyze all that noise. It's going to be me, isn't it? Fuck!